Right now, somewhere in the world, a light switch is being flipped. A phone screen is glowing in a dark bedroom. A street lamp is humming outside a window. And without even thinking about it, someone is deciding to stay awake simply because they can. We assume this is normal. We assume humans have always had a choice about when the day ends. They didn't. For most of human history, when the sun went down, the world didn't just get darker. It became a different place entirely, a place with different rules, different dangers, and different gods. And nowhere was that more true than in one of the most advanced civilizations the ancient world ever produced. Ancient Egypt. We picture Egypt in daylight. Golden sand, blazing sun, pyramids catching fire in the light of dawn. But the Egyptians themselves were obsessed with something else entirely, the night. They didn't fear it the way we might assume. They studied it, they mapped it, they built entire religious systems around it. And what they discovered, what they believed, and what they actually did after dark reveals a side of this civilization that almost never makes it into the textbooks. So tonight, we're not going to look at Egypt in the sunlight. We're going to follow it into the dark. To understand what night meant to an ancient Egyptian, you first have to understand what darkness actually was to them before electricity, before streetlights, before any artificial glow could push it back. When the sun set over the Nile, it didn't fade gently. In a desert climate near the equator, night falls fast. Within an hour, a bright, blazing world could become almost completely black. There was no glow on the horizon, no light pollution, just the stars and whatever small flame a person could keep burning. For the average Egyptian, that flame came from a simple oil lamp. A shallow dish, a wick, an animal fat or vegetable oil, castor oil in particular, was common. It didn't burn bright. It flickered. It smoked. And it didn't last long. Archaeologists have recovered thousands of these lamps from Egyptian homes, workshops, and tombs. Their presence tells us something important. Light after dark wasn't a luxury item reserved for kings. Ordinary people planned their evenings around a small, fragile flame that had to be tended, refueled, and protected from the wind, which means night wasn't empty. It was expensive. Every hour of darkness that a person wanted to fill with light and activity cost oil, cost effort, and cost attention. And that single fact shaped almost everything else that happened once the sun went down. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because while the average household was rationing its lamp oil, one place in Egypt was burning through it by the barrel: the tombs. In the Valley of the Kings on the west bank of the Nile near modern Luxor, archaeologists have found something strange: soot marks. Faint black residue on the ceilings of deep tomb corridors, far from any natural light source. This soot came from wicks, and for decades it puzzled researchers because ordinary oil lamps produce heavy, greasy soot. But the soot in the royal tombs is remarkably light, almost clean. Ancient texts and later analysis suggest the artisans working underground used a refined lamp oil, likely mixed with salt, which reduced smoke and kept the flame steadier. This wasn't the small detail. It meant Egyptian craftsmen had experimented with lighting technology specifically so they could work for hours underground in absolute darkness without choking on fumes or losing visibility on their paintwork. Which raises the obvious question: why would anyone work underground at night for hours painting a tomb that would be sealed and hidden forever? The answer takes us straight into the heart of what night actually meant in Egyptian belief. Because for the Egyptians, night wasn't just the absence of the sun. It was a place, a literal physical realm the sun god traveled through every single night, and understanding that journey unlocks almost everything else in the story. The Egyptians called the sun god Ra. Each morning, Ra rose in the east, crossed the sky in a solar bark, a divine boat, and by evening he descended into the west and vanished. But the Egyptians didn't believe Ra simply disappeared. They believed he entered the underworld, a realm called the Duat. According to Egyptian religious texts, most notably a collection modern scholars call the Nduat, meaning that which is in the underworld, Ra's boat sailed through 12 distinct regions of the Duat each night, one for each hour of darkness. Each hour brought new dangers: fire lakes, serpent demons, a massive underworld snake named Apep who tried to devour the sun god and plunge all of existence into permanent darkness, and each night Ra had to fight his way through. This wasn't just a bedtime story. This was, to the ancient Egyptian mind, actual cosmic infrastructure. If Ra failed to defeat Apep during any one of those 12 hours, the sun simply wouldn't rise. The world would end. So the nighttime sky wasn't neutral. It was a battlefield. And humans on Earth had a role to play in that battle, through ritual, through prayer, and through art. Which brings us back to those tombs. The paintings on the walls of royal tombs weren't decoration, they were instructions. detailed maps of the 12 hours of night, showing exactly which dangers the deceased pharaoh's soul would face on its own journey through the Duat and how to survive each one. The artisans working by lamplight in total darkness weren't just painting pictures. They were preparing a king to travel through the night forever. That belief that the night sky was a living, dangerous realm didn't stay locked inside royal tombs. It shaped how ordinary Egyptians experienced darkness in their own homes. Because if the sun god had to fight monsters every night just to keep existence intact, what protection did an ordinary family have? The answer was ritual, and it happened in nearly every household. Small clay statues of protective deities have been found across Egyptian domestic sites, tucked into corners, placed near sleeping areas, positioned by doorways. One deity in particular shows up again and again in this context, Bez-Ziri. Bez was unlike most Egyptian gods. He wasn't tall or elegant. He was depicted as a squat, bearded dwarf with a lion's mane and a fierce, almost comical grimace, and that appearance was the entire point. Bez was believed to protect households, and especially sleeping children and pregnant women, by scaring away evil spirits with his frightening face. Egyptian parents kept his image near beds and cribs, essentially using him as a nightly guardian standing watch while the family slept. Alongside Bez stood Taweret, a goddess with the body of a hippopotamus, the limbs of a lion, and the tail of a crocodile, again fearsome by design, again positioned as a protector of the vulnerable during the dangerous hours of night. This tells us something important about the emotional reality of Egyptian nights. Beneath the astronomy and the religious texts, there was real human anxiety. Darkness meant vulnerability. And Egyptians responded to that vulnerability the way most ancient cultures did. Not by ignoring it, but by building rituals to face it directly. But not every Egyptian activity after dark was about fear. Some of it was remarkably practical and remarkably advanced. Because while ordinary families were placing protective statues by their beds, Egyptian priests and scholars were doing something else entirely. They were using the night sky as a clock. Long before mechanical timekeeping existed anywhere on Earth, Egyptian astronomers developed a system for tracking the passage of night using specific groups of stars called decans. Painted star charts, some found on the ceilings of tombs and temples dating back to around 2100 BCE, show rows of these decan stars. As the night progressed, different decans would rise above the horizon at roughly regular intervals. By observing which decan star had just appeared, an Egyptian priest could determine, with reasonable accuracy, what hour of the night it was. This system is part of why the Egyptians divided both day and night into 12 hours each, a structure that, filtered through Greek and Roman astronomy centuries later, still shapes the 24-hour clock the entire modern world uses today. Every time you check a clock at 11 at night, you're using a distant echo of Egyptian priests lying on their backs, watching stars rise over the Nile, 3,000 years ago. And this wasn't abstract stargazing. It had a direct, practical purpose. Temple rituals in Egypt weren't confined to daylight hours. Many temples conducted ceremonies around the clock, and priests needed to know precisely when to perform specific rites tied to specific hours of the night, particularly rituals connected to Ra's dangerous journey through the Duat. Getting the timing wrong wasn't just sloppy. In the Egyptian worldview, it risked disrupting the cosmic order itself. So while a family in a mudbrick home was lighting a single lamp and placing a statue of Bez by a sleeping child, a priest a few miles away might be standing on a temple roof, tracking stars, preparing to perform a ritual timed to the exact hour Ra was believed to be facing the serpent ape Ep in the depths below. Two very different nights. Same civilization. Same darkness. Now let's go somewhere else entirely. A place where night wasn't about gods or fear, but about something much more human. Work. On the west bank of the Nile sat a village called Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans and laborers who built and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And thanks to an extraordinary volume of surviving records, ostraka, which are inscribed pottery shards and limestone flakes, we know more about daily life in this one village than almost anywhere else in the ancient world. These records include something remarkable: attendance logs. Egyptologists studying these documents have found notes recording when workers were absent and why: illness, family obligations, and, intriguingly, entries suggesting that some work inside the tombs extended into what would have been nighttime hours, particularly during the final, detailed stages of decorating a royal burial chamber. This lines up with that refined, low-soot lamp oil found deep in the tombs. Skilled painters, working far underground where there was no difference between day and night anyway, appear to have worked extended shifts by lamplight to meet the strict deadlines tied to a pharaoh's burial. Because in Egyptian belief, a pharaoh's tomb had to be ready. If the king died before the tomb was finished, his journey into the afterlife could be jeopardized. That pressure didn't stop at sunset. So while priests tracked stars and families huddled near protective statues somewhere underground, in flickering, carefully engineered lamplight, artists were racing against death itself, one brushstroke at a time. But Egypt's nights weren't only about labor and fear, they were also, for those who could afford it, about pleasure. Wealthier Egyptian households have left behind evidence of nighttime banquets, feasts held after the heat of the day had passed, accompanied by music, dancing, and beer. Beer in particular mattered enormously in Egyptian life. It wasn't just a beverage, it was closer to a dietary staple, consumed by nearly everyone, and it was central to evening social life. Two paintings from wealthy households depict musicians playing harps and flutes late into the evening, alongside dancers and servants pouring drinks by lamplight. These gatherings weren't purely secular either. Some evening feasts were tied to religious festivals, celebrating deities associated with joy, music, and intoxication, most notably the goddess Hathor. Certain festivals dedicated to Hathor were explicitly built around nighttime revelry, drinking, and dance, believed to honor the goddess and, in some interpretations, to reenact myths involving her more dangerous alter ego, the lioness goddess Sekhmet, being pacified through drink. So even Egyptian partying carried religious weight. A night of music and beer wasn't just entertainment, it was, in its own way, a ritual too. Meanwhile, on the streets outside these homes, another kind of nighttime activity was underway. One far less glamorous, but essential to keeping a city functioning after dark. Security. Ancient Egyptian textual evidence, including records from workers' communities like Deir el-Medina, references night watchmen, individuals responsible for guarding property, monitoring for theft, and maintaining order once darkness fell and most of the population had gone to sleep. This mattered particularly around valuable or sensitive sites. Tomb robbery was a persistent, serious problem throughout Egyptian history, so serious that later New Kingdom records describe official investigations and trials of individuals accused of robbing royal tombs. Guarding these sites, especially at night when robbery was most likely to occur, was a genuine occupation. In other words, even 3,000 years ago, someone had a job that boiled down to staying awake while everyone else slept, watching the darkness so others didn't have to. As night deepened further and lamps burned low and even the most determined priests and painters eventually had to rest, we arrive at the most universal Egyptian nighttime activity of all: sleep itself. And even here, the Egyptians did something distinctive. They didn't use pillows the way we imagine them. Instead, archaeologists have recovered large numbers of headrests, curved wooden or stone supports designed to cradle the neck rather than the whole head, elevating the sleeper slightly off the ground. This wasn't just about comfort in a hot climate, though it likely helped with airflow. Headrests carried symbolic weight too. Some were inscribed with protective spells or images of guardian deities, again reinforcing that idea we've seen throughout this story. Sleep, in Egyptian belief, was a vulnerable state, one worth actively protecting. And that vulnerability extended into dreams themselves. The Egyptians took dreams extremely seriously, not as random neural noise, but as genuine messages, sometimes from the gods, sometimes warnings, sometimes prophecy. Surviving texts, including what's now called the Dream Book, dating to the reign of Ramses II, list specific dreams alongside interpretations of whether they were favorable or unfavorable omens. There's even a well-documented tradition of what scholars call temple incubation, where individuals would deliberately sleep inside or near a temple, hoping the resident deity would send a healing or guiding dream directly to them during the night. So even unconsciousness had structure. Even sleep had meaning. By now, a picture has started to form, and it's very different from the one most of us walked in with. Night in ancient Egypt wasn't empty time. It wasn't simply the pause button between one productive day and the next. It was layered, dense, full of overlapping human activity, each shaped by belief, class, occupation, and fear. Somewhere in that darkness, a priest was watching Deccan stars rise to time a sacred ritual. A painter was working underground by carefully engineered lamplight, racing to finish a king's tomb. A family was setting a small statue of a snarling dwarf god beside a sleeping child, hoping it would frighten away whatever lurked in the dark. A guard was standing watch outside a tomb entrance, protecting treasure from thieves who understood just as well as anyone that darkness was the best cover there was. And somewhere else, music was playing, beer was flowing, and people were dancing under torchlight in honor of a goddess who could be either joyful or terrifying, depending on how she was approached. All of this, every single night, for thousands of years, and underneath it all sat one unshakable belief: that the sun itself had to fight for its life in darkness every single night against forces that wanted to erase it permanently. That belief gave Egyptian nights a weight we've almost completely lost today. When we flip a switch and flood a room with light, we're not just seeing better. We're doing something the ancient Egyptians would have found almost unimaginable. We're making the fear go away instantly, completely, without ritual, without prayer, without a single god having to fight a single serpent on our behalf. They didn't have that option. So instead, they built an entire civilization's worth of meaning around the hours between sunset and sunrise. Astronomy to track it, religion to explain it, art to survive it, ritual to protect against it. And somewhere deep in a sealed tomb in the Valley of the Kings, faint traces of soot still cling to a ceiling, the last physical evidence of a flame that burned thousands of years ago, held by someone working through the night, preparing a king for a journey through darkness that, as far as they believed, never actually ends. The sun still rises every morning. But maybe, in some very old, very human corner of our minds, we still remember what it once cost to make sure it would.